Fuck fake Asian hate. Stop anti-vax hate.
Markson joining us live after that extraordinary hour of what really happened in Wuhan. She joins us to talk about it and go through the past hour. Firstly, congratulations, mate. A stunning piece of work. The book has even more detail, and congratulations.
Thank you so much, Paul. It was a team effort, definitely not just me. Rebecca Letourneau, Richard Andrews, Mark Calvert, Paul Whitaker, Darren, everyone from the documentary team. So definitely a team effort with a project like that goes for an hour.
Now, there's lots of moving parts, but there's three big chunks that I really want to go with you here. One, about everything that's pretty obvious about the lab, the cover-up, and the role of the United States about whether they could have jumped earlier on the intelligence that you were able to show tonight. Let's go back to 2012 from the documentary where the lady known in the documentary as Batwoman, she was part of an operation way back in 2012 that was studying what was happening with bats and people getting sick with some of the bat droppings that they found in a cave. We'll roll the tape and get a bit more detail in a sec.
In 2012, Shenzhen Li hit pay dirt. At a disused mine in southwestern China, 6 workers fell ill after clearing away bat manure. 3 died from a coronavirus. But Beijing covered it up and told no one.
And Sharri, it's almost a little microcosm of what would later happen, but we are talking about something that has been many years in the making. Tell us about just how committed they were to this type of work as early as 2012.
So when the Wuhan Institute of Virology found out that 3 miners had died of a suspected coronavirus at that Mozhang mine, they kept going back there. They did their first visit in 2013, and they went back there so many times, collecting hundreds and hundreds of bat samples. And one of those samples, we now know, was RATG13, the virus that has a 96.2% sequence identity. It's the closest virus in the world that we know of to SARS-CoV-2, which causes COVID-19. The closest virus in the world was at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And as we heard in that documentary, Nikolai Petrovsky says, well, this raises the question, was there another similar virus that they collected from the mine that was either SARS-CoV-2 itself or even closer to SARS-CoV-2, or did they collect a precursor virus that they then conducted gain-of-function research on in the lab, because that's what they were doing in that lab, and combined it with other viruses in a chimeric virus to create COVID-19. And Paul, that's why the virus database from the Wuhan Institute of Virology is just such a crucial piece of evidence that we still don't have. They took it offline on the 12th of September 2019. And when the World Health Organization team went in to investigate with Peter Daszak, they never even asked to see that database.
It's extraordinary. I mean, also, again, in the documentary, when you talk about the Frankenstein nature of this, put simply, part of what that lab does on any normal day would be to study an existing virus and cross-pollinate it with others. And again, expertly explained in the documentary. Here's the highlight.
They've been putting these spike proteins from different viruses in their backbones and then studying like how well does that infect human cells. Just this alone formed a very plausible argument that this is actually the lab that hosts so many different coronaviruses, explains the lab leak the best.
I was particularly fascinated by the discussions that you had with that bloke who'd been studying from afar in Moscow. His doubts seem to be, fairly obvious about where this is from, how it works, and about how potent it is. Once you match that together with the 96% crossover of the things that were also already there, it's pretty obvious what was most likely to come out of that lab.
100%. This always should have been the first place that everyone started to look. The virus broke out in Wuhan. The bats were the equivalent of a 20-hour drive away. They were in hibernation at that time of year. You had the world's leading coronavirus reservoir at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. We knew what they'd been doing because the US had not only been funding the lab, but there had been cables sent back that warned of the safety conditions in that lab and the lack of trained safety technicians. So there were serious concerns about this lab. And you heard in that documentary, the former head of British intelligence, Sir Richard Dearlove, he said that when that lab kicked the French out, he said this was built with the French, and then the French were kicked out when the BSL-4, the latest lab, was ready to open. He said that should have raised alarm bells about the type of research that they might be intending to conduct. Why wouldn't they want international cooperation? There was a reason for that. So there were already a lot of concerns about the activities at this lab even before the pandemic. And in fact, even an Israeli weapons expert had named it as a biological weapons site of concern in a publicly available document as well.
And then again, the extraordinary evidence that you've been able to be reporting on for a long time at The Australian, put together in the book and then explained again in the documentary, is about once something started to go wrong, what happened on the ground in Wuhan. Again, the highlight.
Yes.
On the 12th of September 2019, the virus database at the Wuhan Institute of Virology was taken offline. 22,000 coronavirus samples gone. And a month later, the institute went into a communications blackout. There was no cell phone or signals activity on the compound for about 2 weeks. How significant would a blackout period at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, as has been reported, how significant would that be?
And again, it would be another circumstance that would be difficult to explain other than there was a problem that the Chinese Communist Party was aware of and was trying to deal with before it became an outbreak that was public and then ultimately a pandemic that affected every single person on the planet.
And then in case there was any doubt, and there is no doubt, the blockbuster into the documentary from Sharri.
Cybersecurity analysts at Internet 2.0 recovered Chinese government data that had been virtually wiped from the web. It showed there was a buy-up of PCR equipment used to test for coronaviruses in Wuhan in 2019. The next month, one of those machines went to the Wuhan Institute.
Sharri, I'll turn your question back on you. Is that the ultimate smoking gun?
Look, I'd have to repeat what John Ratcliffe said, that when you put it all together, there's a preponderance of evidence that something happened at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And Paul, that's how I've actually approached this investigation. I've looked at it as two key parts to investigate. One, you speak to the scientists about the unusual features of the virus itself and what are the unusual features like the furin cleavage site that indicate it might have been subject to lab manipulation, even if it was once a natural virus. And then the other part is what was happening in Wuhan? What was the Wuhan Institute of Virology doing at that time? And Paul, when you drill down into the evidence and you see that they were taking the virus database offline on that same day, we now know from these tenders uncovered by the cybersecurity firm Internet 2.0, Robert Potter and Dave Robinson, we now know that they were then beefing up their security on that exact same day, putting in a new air ventilation system, a new air medical incinerator, and then the coronavirus testing machine that they purchased, as well as the blackout period, and the workers who fell sick. So there's just so much evidence that we've been able to uncover over the past few months as part of this investigation that really is, beyond doubt that there was an incident at the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
And then once all of that evidence became clear, and again, the patchwork of expertise that's inside this documentary of the people that were the observers, the participants, the people watching from near and afar, that bloke from MI6, unbelievable, where he makes it nice and clear about how ridiculous the report was, that of course only spent just a very short period of time at the actual lab, all of course because one of the worst people to put in that investigation team, who of course we'll get to Dr. Fauci and his connections to all of that a little bit later. But again, he just bells the cat that WHO report not worth the paper it was written on. Roll the tape.
As to the possibility of COVID-19 coming from a lab, the WHO report found it extremely unlikely. They spent just 3 hours at the institute, And even Tedros walked away from the findings.
Oh, it's a complete fiasco, the report. You know, it's 413 pages long, and only 3 pages are devoted to the possibility that we're dealing with a lab escapee.
And then the second chunk here of what I want to talk about is, again, the mass cover-up, the cover-up that happens either because people don't want to displease the Chinese, and that was the WHO, or the people who didn't want to add any sort of credence to what they were hearing out of the United States and principally Donald Trump. Again, look at the resistance. The reports in scientific magazines that they would not run, written by experts saying there's a problem here and it comes from the lab.
To begin with, I certainly didn't approach the issue with any sort of suspicion or foregone conclusions. However, things began to change as the pandemic evolved.
Sir Richard Dearlove also ran into resistance to the lab leak theory. He's the former head of the British spy agency MI6. Early in the pandemic, 2 scientists asked for his help in publishing a paper that cast doubt on COVID-19 coming from an infected animal.
We approached Nature, we approached Science, we approached the American Journal of Virology, we approached various publications in the UK, and it was clear to me that there was a sort of united front not to put anything in the public domain which questioned the Chinese narrative.
And Sharri, this is the thing. I mean, people like him they're not loose with their words. They're very definite with what they say. They were definite with their actions of trying to take it to scientific publications first rather than other parts of the media. But what does it say to you that the scientific community and the people who would, of course, have a great thirst for anything about COVID-19 rejected it time and time and time again?
This is, Paul, one of the most shocking parts of the story, that there was this censorship of science, that credible scientists who are not political in any way, shape or form had their science blocked from being published. And it meant that the official narrative of the Chinese Communist Party was the predominant narrative for the entire first year of the pandemic. And what's worse is that the scientists who were shaping that narrative, people like Peter Daszak, who secretly authored the Lancet paper that came out in February 2020. I say secretly because we didn't know he'd been behind it and that he'd been working with the Wuhan Institute of Virology until November that same year. He, at the same time, was advising the intelligence community in the United States. So you really start to see how this was a massive cover-up. He was advising the intelligence agencies, telling them that it was a conspiracy that to suggest that the virus might have escaped from a lab, when in fact lab accidents are extremely common, particularly with infectious viruses, and other scientists had been warning about this for years. It's why the Obama administration banned gain-of-function research back in 2014. So you had the scientists who were so conflicted, who were so compromised, not only shaping the official narrative, but then going into Wuhan to do the investigation for the World Health Organization. And we stand here today and everyone would just be shaking their heads saying, how is this possible? And yet every step of the way, it's taken an effort to unpick. There has been resistance. And even Anthony Fauci, who knew about the research, he was in email contact with Peter Daszak, and we just heard then, he kept silent in those Oval Office meetings. He never told Trump that the Wuhan Institute of Virology, this lab in the city where the virus broke out, was actually the world's foremost laboratory on coronaviruses, and that the US was funding the genetic manipulation of viruses.
Well, and this is where no doubt the consequences of this documentary, the book and the reporting is going to be that no doubt there's going to be questions about, well, who decided to flip that rule? Was it freelancing that was happening from Fauci, one of his apparatchiks? Did somebody not, go through the detail when something was ticked and flicked somewhere else inside the government? But then we get to this big question too, which is about whether the United States had an opportunity to act on some intelligence, the intelligence that you were able to present, that picture of what was happening in September. And one of the COVID investigators told you this.
My shock was that we had actually could have had foreknowledge. We could have known in November of 2019 that there was a disaster occurring inside Wuhan, inside their most important biological facilities, where something absolutely tragic, traumatic, and dramatic was occurring, and we could have reacted to it. I said we could have, the whole world could have been different. It would have been like stopping 9/11 before it happened.
And he went even further with this point, and we'll include what Mike Pompeo, the then Secretary of State, and remember, former boss of the CIA, had to say about why this never made it as high as it should have.
We collect everything and know nothing in our governments these days. It's the big data problem. We're all drowning in it. We had the means to know something, but we didn't either analyze it or disseminate it or even know that it was collected.
I always worry about that. As the former director of the CIA, I was always worried that we were collecting information, but we weren't able to process it sufficiently timely and get that information to the right places.
Is this a pandemic that potentially could have been prevented had the intelligence agencies paid closer attention to the information that was coming in?
We'll have to go look back at what was actually in the possession, what was the complexity of the information, what was the certainty of that information.
Now, Sharri, we certainly know where Donald Trump, Mike Pompeo and lots of others were about wanting to hold China to account. We obviously know that the United States can't just reach into places like China, but this is a fundamental question here about it either not making it to the president's desk or it not being spoken about way earlier than the early months of 2020.
Yeah. So we were able to uncover and present clear evidence that the intelligence agencies were warned that there was an outbreak in 2019, and that was both the warning from Wei Jingsheng himself, and he admitted on camera that he told the intelligence agencies that there was a coronavirus in Wuhan in late 2019. He, of course, suspected it was a deliberate release, which no one else I have interviewed thinks. Everyone else thinks, including Trump, that it was accidental. The fact that he thinks that is a testament to the brutal way he's been treated by the Chinese Communist Party. And you have to remember that he was in prison for 18 years in China before his defection to the United States. So there was his warning, and he maintains impeccable contacts at high levels of the Communist Party. And then there was also David Asher admitted that the intelligence he uncovered that the Wuhan Institute of Virology workers who fell sick with COVID-like symptoms in late 2019, that first came into the possession of the US government that same year, late 2019. So we do need to ask the question, and I think Pompeo's right when he said we need to go back and look at how this information was analyzed, how it was processed. And as David Asher says, is this a global spread that could have been prevented? Is this a pandemic that could have had a different outcome if people had paid closer attention? And we know that the technology, the technical capabilities of the intelligence agencies are better than they've ever been. But the question is, did they act on that information that came into their possession?
Well, again, congratulations. If you want more detail, and who wouldn't after watching what they just have, please check out her book, Sharri Markson's What Really Happened in Wuhan. Congrats on your daily reporting, the culmination of the book and what we've just seen tonight on Sky News, mate. Again, well done to you and the whole team.
Thank you.
Fighting fake news.
Fuck fake Asian hate. Stop anti-vax hate. Memphis. Real news. Pay attention, Memphis. Have you figured out the fake news yet? I report. You decide what's real, what's fake. Fuck fake Asian hate. Stop anti-vax hate. Let's have a conversation.
Fighting fighting fake news.
One of my pet peeves that I see between the fighting on here over the pandemic is when a vaccinated person turns to an unvaccinated person and be like, oh, well, you didn't know what was in the food and you eat that, or you don't know what was in the butt injections, or you don't know what's in that. Yeah, motherfucker, they didn't know what was in that shit, but was nobody threatening with their motherfucking jobs? Nobody's threatening you with your fucking freedom if you want to suck down a GMO sandwich. Nobody was threatening your freedom with the other shit that you didn't know what was in it. This shit that you don't know what's in it, they're taking your freedoms and doing a lot of suspicious tactics. So now motherfuckers gotta say, what the fuck is in this shit? You get it?
Fighting fake news.
Humans are despicable.